Taylor Hendricks is showing signs of being a potentially elite defensive player for the Utah Jazz, and it's got to fire you up. We're talking about it next on Locked on Jazz. Bum 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 bum.
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider, and this is Locked on Jazz. Today, Taylor Hendricks showing real signs on defense. We'll dig into that. Got schooled a little bit, got educated. It's fine. That's what's to be expected, but there's all sorts of really positive signs. That game felt so much better. The value of Lauri Markkanen and Jordan Clarkson out on the floor. Lauri's next steps became obvious during that one, and the Jazz had a 5-minute stretch that cost them the game. And oh boy, Philadelphia and the Clippers, what is happening to you? Or Phoenix and the Clippers, what is happening to you? We'll touch on all those things on today's edition of Locked on Jazz. As I mentioned, I am David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. And this is Locked on Jazz. It's your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you so much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free. We are available on all podcasting apps. We are also on YouTube. Thanks so very much for tuning in. Thanks to all the people who stopped by at the broadcast site for their sticker. It was awesome to get you. Nice guy and his couple, nice guy with his wife stopped by at the end of the day, right at the end of the ball game. And my audio engineer, Ben, has them in case I'm busy. We were having a problem kind of earlier where I was on the air and things like that. So we've got it taken care of. So thank you very much for stopping by and showing your support and being an everydayer. All right. There are, in the midst of what I think we've lost 15 of 19, or maybe it's even 16 of 19 at this point. Or it's 15 of 18 or 16 of 19. It's one or the other. There are some really positive signs with Taylor Hendricks. He had Luka Doncic for the second straight night. So let's dig into what we saw. We saw him get pump faked. We saw Luka got an edge on him. We saw all sorts of things like that. You know why? Because he's Luka. So there's nothing really wrong with that. It's 17 of 20. Didn't really calculate that completely. Is that right? Yeah, I guess it's 17 of 20. But let's dig into it. So he's now played Luka for the most minutes he's matched up against anyone in the NBA. If you look at Taylor Hendricks matchups, the most minutes he's played, he's guarded Luka, Victor, Jimmy Butler, Anthony Edwards, Jalen Johnson, Jaden McDaniels, Kyle Kuzma, Paulo Banchero, and then actually, of all weird things, PJ Washington, Chet Holmgren, Jonathan Kuminga, Bogdan Bogdanovic, and Brandon Miller. So those are the guys he's guarded the most possessions of anyone in the NBA. And here's what's crazy. So Luka got 7 shooting fouls against him, which is not to be unexpected. So I'm not trying to portray that like he shut anyone down or didn't. We're just seeing signs at 20 years old now of what Taylor Hendricks is capable of doing as a defender, and it's exciting. So he's guarded Luka for partial of, at least according to NBA.com, 74 partial possessions. Luka shot 11 of 28, 39%, and 2 of 12 from 3 on those possessions. It's pretty great. I mean, that's pretty great. Luka, 2 of 12 from 3 is probably dictated by Luka. So he was 9 of 16 on 2-point shots. Okay. Like he's as good as any offensive player in the league. And he was just 2 of 12 from threes, and he got 7 shooting fouls. There's no shutdown here. But what an experience. Victor Wembanyama went 4 of 10 against him. Anthony Edwards went 4 of 9 and 1 of 3 from 3. Jalen Johnson. So this is really interesting to me. Here's Jalen Johnson, who's not one of the top 10 offensive players in the NBA, who's long, similar to third year in the league in Atlanta. Good player, averaging 17, 18 points a game. He went 1 of 8 when guarded by Taylor over 30 possessions. Jaden McDaniels, another non-elite player, went 1 of 4. So in the little time here where we've suddenly taken Taylor Hendricks and put him up against non-elite offensive players, Jalen Johnson's 1 of 8. Jaden McDaniels 1 of 4. PJ Washington's 0 for 2. Bogdan Bogdanovic was 1 of 4. Now put him against elite, and he does pretty well against Luka, though I think it's relevant. The 9 of 16 on twos. Victor goes 4 of 10. Anthony Edwards goes 4 of 9. Kyle Kuzma goes 4 of 9, and Jimmy Butler took him to class. Jimmy Butler, 7 of 10. Paulo Banchero, 4 of 5. Bigger, stronger, physical, outmanned him. But in here, you're seeing, one, incredible who he's guarded. Right? Will Hardy, Jazz head coach, has stuck to the game plan, which is putting him on the most difficult defender each and every game to see how he deals with that. And then secondarily, you have the experience that he's gaining. He's been beat up, but he's also done well. So I just think it's really exciting to see. What we're seeing, though, is his length is impacting people on those three-point shooting numbers. And the experience he's garnering is real. And he has a great mentality toward it. When he's playing hard, he's fighting through it. And two, when Taylor has been asked like who he's trying to build himself after right now, he's answering defensive wing players, not Paul George. Like the easy answer for a 6'9" guy for him is like, well, I want to be Paul George. Okay, well, right now, you actually have a 1-2 dribble game instead of a 4-5 dribble game, meaning you can dribble it once or twice and make a play, in contrast to dribbling it 4 or 5 times and making a play. You're not there yet, so let's not get too excited. But his mentality's been perfect. So really exciting kind of look at what Taylor Hendricks can do defensively. And, I think that big number is 73 possessions guarding Luka, 12 minutes of matchup time against Luka. Now Victor comes back into the house if he plays. He didn't play last night, and he has that. And then, Houston doesn't really have that same type of player. He bounced around against a lot of guys. He guarded Jalen Green for 12 possessions. Green had his way with him. Green had his way with everyone that night. He went 5 of 6, 3 for 4 from 3. So we'll see whether or not we go back to Jalen Green and if he shows any development there. These are the fun things to watch here for the remaining part of the season. Overall, last night just felt so much better. I mean, so much better. Having Lauri, having Jordan on the floor, having ball movement. I said, yesterday's show really was like, okay, that's enough. Like, I can't handle watching Keontae have to try to muster through this anymore. You're asking way too much for him. And I thought, and I think he is. I think I've been concerned about Keontae a few times this year on being just overwhelmed, and it feels a little bit like that again. 2 of 11 last night, 0 for 6 from 3. The three-point shooting has really deserted him here for an extended stretch now. And he, that's the value these guys get out of it. Like, no one's going home to him and say, hey, gosh, your defensive rotations were awesome, right? Like Keontae's going home, talking to whoever he's with, and the conversation is, man, I can't buy a bucket right now, right? I mean, Keontae in the last, I think 8 games is about 16% from 3 and 34% from the field. He is 34% from the field and 16% from 3, not about. So he's scuffling. That's fine. And last night he looked fine scuffling. Like it was in the realm of the game. Everything was okay because Lauri was out there for 34 minutes and Jordan was out there for 33 minutes. And even though Jordan didn't make a shot, he had 8 assists. The ball popped. They moved. Jazz had the assist numbers in the first half of last night's game were just absolutely fabulous. The team just looked so much different and so much better and so much more valuable to anyone who was on the floor playing. So really, last night was a fun night and just a good reminder. Like as we throw these kids to the middle of the ocean right now, there is something to having these guys play with the best players and how much it works for them. Jazz last night, 11 assists in the first quarter on 13 field goals. Second quarter was 7 of 10. I mean, so in the first half of last night's game, the Jazz were just terrific. They had 18 assists on 23 field goals last night. And, at the halftime, those assists, 5 of them are Keontae, 6 are from Jordan. So they're really moving. Jazz only had 4 turnovers in the first half, too. 3 of them were Jordan's, but he had 6 assists. So really, you just felt this kind of great ball movement, everyone playing in the correct way, understanding what they're supposed to be doing. And then they did lose that a little bit. I think in the third quarter, they had 5 of 8. So 5 of 7 assists. So you actually really had it that 23 of the first 31 field goals were assisted. And then in the fourth quarter, it was not that way. They fell apart a little bit in the fourth quarter, moving the basketball the way they wanted to. And they had just a 5-minute stretch of really bad basketball. Will Hardy's been saying it. If we can find a way to just limit the bad stretches to a minute at a time, be fine. But they lost their bearings, didn't get a field goal for 5 minutes, and game got away from them because those guys are really good. All right, we're just getting started. Some really interesting numbers on Lauri Markkanen, isolation game, some positives, some real development that's still needed for him to make the next step as a star. It is all here on Locked on Jazz. Today's edition of Locked on Jazz is brought to you by Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street, also located in Logan and in Linden. The Murdochs have been in Utah for over 80 years, and Murdoch Hyundai, oh, what a lineup of cars. The Hyundai, I've done the research. I've ended up buying 3 of them. Why? Because from my standpoint, when I looked at it, it was the best dollar figure I could get for the safety features. It was the best dollar I could spend for all the bells and whistles, and I like the way the car looked. You've got to make those 3 decisions. Really, that's what buying cars all about. Those 3 decisions, and I got great customer service from Blake and the Murdoch family. We want to set you up with a locked-on VIP treatment. So if you're going to look for a car right now, include the Hyundai. You'll see that for the dollar figure, that what you're spending, you're getting the most safety features, you're getting the most bells, the most whistles, the most features, all those things. I promise you that. Then you decide how it looks, whether you like it, and we'll make sure you get the VIP treatment from Murdoch Hyundai, located in Linden and in Logan, but also at 4646 South State Street in the brand new building. So feel free to email me, please, at dlock09@gmail.com. That's dlock09@gmail.com so that we can set you up with your Murdoch VIP experience over at Murdoch Hyundai. Today's show is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. The easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's you against the numbers. You pick more or less on just 2 to 6 stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, enormous selection of players and stat types make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. And on Tuesdays, it's big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts selected players, projections up to 25% to provide even more value. Plus, Demons and Goblins are going on. It's the newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins get you different payouts, and you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. It's all at prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for your first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for your first deposit match up to $100. Thanks so much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps. We thank you very much. Have you subscribed? If you're on our YouTube channel, please do so. If you're listening right now, that would be absolutely fabulous. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Well, turn down the volume and all the shouting and make the switch today to Locked on Sports Today. It's the free 24/7 streaming channel programmed to you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked on Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on Amazon Fire TV channels, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Have I gotten my word? Any word yet on what the feeds are today? Nope, haven't learned. So we go to a lot of the biggest stories today, get the local experts, and give you some great insight on all that. All right, so here's some interesting things on Lauri Markkanen. So for the season, Lauri averages 1.04 points per isolation. He's 34th out of 100 players in the league in isolation. Okay, so that's fine. I kind of tried to break it in half. And if you look at his last 58 in isolation, you get super excited. He's 4th best in the NBA. And you're like, yes! And then I start to dig in, and it's not so much of a yes. So since February 1st, where the Jazz, instead of giving Lauri an isolation kind of every now and then, the Jazz really started giving Lauri isolations. Like last night, Lauri had 6 isolation plays. That's probably the season high. So they're really very consciously now, kind of regardless of matchup. So I think what we had going on earlier this year with Lauri on his isolations was that if he had the right matchup, the right time, the right feel, he would go to isolation, he would beat his guys. Since February 1st, Lauri's only played, I think, about 14 games, and he's run 33 isolations. So if you kind of think about that on the season and we look at Lauri's isolation numbers, you'll see that there's been just a huge uptick in how often he ran in isolation for the year. And that's all started kind of right around February 1st. Now, somewhat, you have to be a little careful of this. Some of this is post-trade deadline. Floor spacing is not quite as good without Simone and some of those kind of things. But if you look at Lauri for the season, and he's not a high isolation player. Lauri's run, as I mentioned, 101 isolations. That's 101st of all the players in the NBA of running isolation. So that's not a lot of isolation. He's run 33 or 37 since February 1st. And since February 1st, he's played 15 games. So now we're running 2 or 3 a game. And he drops to 1.0 points per. So his last 58, it looks all exciting that he's great. He's 1.18 and it feels really good. And then you dig into the last 33. So he actually had this kind of crazy stretch where he was unstoppable in isolation. But if you go to February 1st, when we started isolating him much more and giving him the ball 2 or 3 times a game on isolations, then all of a sudden there's a drop in production. And he goes to 1.10 points per possession. My keyboard has died. If you're wondering, for those watching on YouTube, why am I reaching over to the other side? It's because I'm trying to confirm my numbers. And unfortunately, my keyboard that I have that works right in front of me just died for whatever. Okay, so then we go to the All-Star break. And again, Lauri hasn't played a lot and he's been banged up a tiny bit with that. So, you have to be a little careful here. But we go to the All-Star break, and Lauri, since the All-Star break, since February 16th, has played in a grand total of 8 games. Well, in those 8 games, we've really started to ISO him much more. So in those 8 games, he has 20 ISOs. So now we're up to this kind of same thing of like 3 ISOs a game. And he drops to 0.947. And then if you look at last night, he's 0.833 points per possession. So this is the next step for Lauri. For the season, his ISO numbers look really good. There's even a stretch where he's dominant in isolation. But to me, it looks like, if you look at the numbers and you decipher what's really going on, what it is that for a period of time, Lauri was able to pick his spots of when he went isolation and then he beat guys. But what we want out of Lauri now is that when we need a bucket in the fourth quarter, or as Will Hardy talked about post-game last night, when there is a switch, we want him to demonstratively take the switch and beat it. It's not there yet. This is what they're working on. This is his development. We've talked about it a lot. So in the last 37 isolations, Lauri's at 1.0 points per isolation. And that's since February 1st. And then if you go look at and that ranks, and then in his ranking drops, right? So his ranking is 34th out of 100. Since February 1st, you have the top. He's also on the bottom level of isolation, right? So he's running isolation about as often as Bojan Bogdanovic. Like he's in the top 100 isolation players in the league, but not any more than that. And so that's the next thing, is not only do you want his efficiency to go up, but you actually want his work. You want him to be ISOing much more. So if you look at Lauri now in the top 100 isolations, and there is one note on this that I want to point out. He's 43rd in the league since February 1st. With his last 37 ISOs, he's 43rd in the league out of 100. And then if you go to the most recent number, he slides a little bit more in the last 20 games, or in the last 20 ISOs, it's a little less. So there's 2 things that are important here. There's 3. One thing that I think we got to put a caveat on all this, and why I think his rank is more important than his numbers, and that's the league changed the rules halfway through the year. And so some of these isolations are now harder to do, and I'm sure isolation's less efficient than it was earlier in the league. So if you go to the top 100 isolation players for the year, Lauri's 34th. For a little while, he was 4th. Since February 1st, he's 43rd percentile. You just like him to be better than that. And there's two things you need here. One is you just need a lot more isolation out of him. Now, big Jason, most of the guys who run a lot of isolation are guys that are able to get the ball, put it on the deck, do their thing. So, Giannis is the elite guy of guys who aren't bringing the ball up at 187 and Pascal Siakam at 150. And the rest of these guys are all, primary ball handlers. So Lauri's not going to be running 100 isolations since February 1st in a span of 13 games. But you would like to see if he can get up to the numbers, of where, Bam Adebayo, Domantas Sabonis, some of these other guys are, so that you can really start to give him the ball 5 or 6 times a game and have him make these plays. And as of right now, this is an area where he just needs to add a ton of efficiency. It's hard, but this is the development next stage for him, and we're seeing it. So to sum that up, one, we're seeing much more, but we'd like to see even more, right? So I think that you have him at about 2 or 3 a game, and you'd probably like to have him at 4 or 5. And then the second thing is the efficiency's got to go up. And we saw it last night. That's where we were lacking a little bit. All right. Things felt better, but there was just a quick 5-minute stretch where you can just kind of, things came undone. We'll touch on that for a second. And Phoenix and LA Clippers, what has happened? We're touching on all that when we continue here on Locked On Jazz. Next episode of today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is online therapy that's convenient, easy to use, flexible, meets your convenient. It's all at betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. When I think about therapy, I think of it as performance enhancing for your brain. So we get the opportunity to get things off our chest, for ourselves to, work through things, figure out why we're upset, sad, excited, emotional mood swings, allowing outside world to dictate our actions rather than staying internal. And this is where therapy can help you. Are you in the same cycle of problems? Therapy hopefully can answer that for you, of why you keep getting up there. So visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. Think it is performance enhancing for the brain. And then the great thing about BetterHelp is it's online, it's convenient, and allows you to switch therapists if you don't find one that matches for you. It makes it a lot easier to overcome some of the big hurdles that people have getting to therapy. BetterHelp.com/lockedonnba. Get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. Jazz and the San Antonio Spurs Wednesday. That'll be on SiriusXM, as well as on the Jazz app, as well as 1280 The Zone 97.5. Congratulations, University of Utah women, for a great season. Came to an end last night in Gonzaga. So sorry to see that. And Caitlin Clark survived last night. Pac-12 was on the verge of having 6 of the final 16 teams, instead just 5. Pretty great for their final run. So last night, the Jazz are playing great. They're right in there. And then they just have this sequence that's so there's 8 minutes left, and it's 100-96. Johnny Juzang takes a 3 on the right side and misses. It's not a great shot. The shot clock, I love Johnny Juzang's confident enough to take that shot, and he's been making them, so I guess it's great. But we're 10 seconds into the shot clock, and you can decide whether you think Johnny Juzang should be the one taking that shot. We get a stop, and then Jordan Clarkson throws one away for a bad turnover. And then Kyrie misses. We get another stop, so the defense is playing great. Then Johnny Juzang kind of has to force up a 3. Again, this one, I'm not going to just say Johnny shouldn't shoot, but that was not a great look. And there were only 6 seconds on the shot clock this time, so probably more forgiving on that one. So suddenly, Lauri's in the game, and he's just missed a 14-footer on possession. We go 3 straight possessions, no Lauri. The only 2 shots are Johnny Juzang shots. That means to me the defense is dictating. Lauri checks out. Clarkson kind of shoots, kind of turns it over. Don't really know what that was. It was in the middle lane. Keontae throws a loose one-handed pass that goes by Colin Sexton out of bounds. And now all of a sudden, the game's kind of close to over. Like it's 104-96 now. And then PJ Washington hits a shot and it's 107-96. Like the game's kind of gone. Like, I don't think you're coming back from 11 back on Luka in the final 5 minutes. So in a span of just like 2 minutes and 30 seconds, 2 Clarkson turnovers, two Clarkson mishaps. I don't know. They called one of them a shot, but the ball never got close to the rim. Vicinity, but not close. 2 Johnny Juzang. So basically 3 turnovers and 2 Johnny Juzang threes. That's just not a great 5-play sequence. In the mix of that, Luka's exhausted. He's literally takes an offensive possession where he's got his hands on his shorts and he's just standing there. He gets cross-matched and is being guarded by Lauri Markkanen, and the Jazz don't get Lauri the ball on that possession. I think that was a Johnny Juzang 3. Or might have been. Anyway, I'm not sure which one it was. But like, that's where like we hear Will talk about recognition and things of that nature. We've got to recognize. And they didn't. And so that's just how a game slips away. And we're seeing that right now. Just a good reminder, I think, that when we finally see the Jazz win games again and get back to it, that how hard it is to win and how much, and how easy it is to, it's actually, I'll take it the other way. It's so easy to lose. Elsewhere in the NBA last night, Phoenix loses to San Antonio. Phoenix, you keep waiting. And what's interesting about Phoenix is up until this point, their recent losses were all against super good teams. So in March, their losses, they played Houston back-to-back games at home. It's hard. They lost the second one. Then they lost to Oklahoma City. They lost to Boston twice. They lost to Milwaukee at Milwaukee. And you're like, okay, like fine. Then last night, they lost to San Antonio 104-102. They were in San Antonio for 2 in a row. They now go to Denver, Oklahoma City, and the Pelicans for the next 3. Like you kind of had to get that one. We'll see. They're so talented whether they can turn this around and go get those. But they could end up losing 4 in a row here. And that group doesn't seem to be that well bonded that that's the case. The flip side is that their wins recently are San Antonio, LA, 76ers without Embiid, Charlotte, Cleveland in a game in which Donovan did not play, nor did Evan Mobley. Toronto, they beat Denver in overtime in that great game. But since March, that's March 5th. So Phoenix has got to be really careful. They're walking themselves right toward the plan. That was a big loss last night. The Clippers, who were the dominant team of the NBA here for a little while, quite honestly, suddenly look awful. The Clippers were rolling and incredible and 34-15. Or even just on All-Star break, were 36-17. And something happened when they came back from break, which leads you to believe that like they just maybe weren't that excited to be back. And since then, they are 8-10. And last night allowed 133 points at home to the Pacers. They lost to the 76ers without Embiid there the night before. Their recent wins are Portland, Chicago, Houston. And they did get in Minnesota for a good win. Memphis, post All-Star break, those are their wins. But they have some losses that like Atlanta, Philadelphia, Indiana, and now they embark on the road. 76ers, Orlando, Charlotte, Sacramento to wrap that up before we'll see them twice before we're done. And the Clippers finished with 2 of their final 4 games against Phoenix. So this race is going to be nuts because New Orleans is knocking on the Clippers and have now tied the Clippers for 4th. Sacramento, Dallas, and Phoenix are all within a half game each other for 6, 7, 8. Lakers are pretty well set at 9. And the Warriors are 10. The most likely scenario right now, and I mean, these aren't very likely. Denver's likely the number 1 seed at 41%. Minnesota is likely the number 2 seed at 36%. Thunder had a bad loss the other day. They're now likely the 3rd seed at 37%. Pelicans are now more likely than the Clippers, but only at 55%. I mean, these aren't very high numbers. Clippers are likely the 5th seed. Dallas the Sacramento still has the odds-on favorite to the 60, but the loss last night, Phoenix now has a 7% chance of not playing in the playing game. 9% chance. So right now, the chances are that Phoenix has only a 9% chance of not being in the playing game. Dallas, Sacramento are about even Steven on that. At 48, 47%. And then the Houston Rockets, by the way, chances of making the play-in are still only about 7%. Oh, excuse me. They're 19% to get into the, they're 25% to get in the play-in. Only about 7% to actually make it. But they're 25% chance to get the play-in, which means the Warriors now have a 25% chance of getting knocked out. Crazy. All right. That's where it sits. This is going to be fun to watch. East is equally as exciting, actually. That is Locked On Jazz today. Thanks so much for tuning in. We now send you the first ever 24/7 national sports channel. It's called Locked On Sports Today. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, either on Amazon Fire or on YouTube. It's Locked On Sports Today, your 24/7 insight on everything going on with sports.